The year 1833 clung to the remote Portuguese hills like the persistent mist, its tendrils reaching into the very soul of the Seminary of São João de Latran. Here, within walls that had stood for centuries, a chilling silence had replaced the usual hum of devotion. 11 young novices, each on the precipice of a life dedicated to God, had vanished. Not fled, not run away in the night, but truly vanished from rooms locked from the inside, leaving behind only an unsettling void. Father Antonio, a man whose faith was anchored firmly in the bedrock of logic and empirical observation, arrived with a grim sense of professional duty. His reputation preceded him. Where others saw the hand of the divine or the malevolent whisper of the infernal, Antonio sought the tangible, the explainable. The local bishop, a gaunt figure whose usual ecclesiastical sternness had been replaced by a palpable tremor, had personally dispatched the summons. Antonio prided himself on his pragmatism, a quality that often set him apart from his more traditionally minded and often more superstitious brethren. The seminary itself was a formidable Stoic edifice, its granite walls weathered by the relentless Atlantic winds that swept inland. The massive oak door, reinforced with thick pitted iron bands, groaned slightly as it opened, revealing a dimly lit courtyard. The air inside hung heavy, thick with the scent of damp stone, ancient parchment and something else. Something indefinable, akin to suppressed fear. As Father Miguel, a perpetually nervous junior priest, led Antonio through the echoing, seemingly endless corridors, Antonio observed the hushed whispers and furtive glances of the remaining seminarians. Fear, he noted, was not merely present. It was a physical entity, clinging to the shadows like a shroud. The first disappearance had been dismissed perhaps too readily as a moment of youthful doubt, a novice succumbing to cold feet. But then, a second boy vanished from a similarly secured cell, followed swiftly by a third. That was when the carefully maintained facade of calm shattered, giving way to an uncontrolled, spreading panic. Now, 11 were gone. Their narrow cots remained undisturbed, their meager personal belongings, a worn rosary, a small hand-copied prayer book, a neatly folded spare tunic, all lay exactly where they had been left. Crucially, the heavy wooden doors of their individual cells remained bolted from within. There were no signs of forced entry, no shattered window panes, no telltale scratch marks on the locks. It was as if each young man had simply ceased to exist, dissolved into the very air within the confines of those 4 unforgiving walls. Father Antonio began his investigation in the cell of the first missing novice, a quiet young man named João. The room was stark, a testament to the seminary's vows of austerity. A narrow cot, a rough wooden stool, and a small, unadorned table. Upon the table rested a well-thumbed Bible, open to a passage from Psalms. The single window, thick with accumulated grime, was secured with a rusty latch, clearly positioned on the inside. Antonio ran his gloved fingers along the dusty surfaces, his eyes meticulously scanning for any irregularity, any minute detail that might offer a chink in this wall of inexplicable events. The lock on the door, though ancient, was undeniably functional. Father Miguel, fidgeting nervously beside him, confirmed that each time a disappearance was discovered, the door had been so firmly bolted from the inside that the clergy had been forced to break it down. "There were no tunnels, Father, no hidden passages," Miguel whispered, his voice barely a breath, his eyes wide with a profound disquiet. "The entire grounds have been searched, every single corner of the seminary, even the old crypts. They simply vanished into thin air." Antonio pressed him further, his voice calm and steady, a deliberate counterpoint to Miguel's rising anxiety. He inquired about the novices' daily routines, about their interactions, about any unusual occurrences or strange behaviors in the weeks leading up to the first vanishing. Miguel could offer little beyond the collective. mounting unease among the younger seminarians, hushed conversations overheard after evening prayers, a pervasive sense of foreboding that seemed to have permeated the very stones of the building long before the first boy disappeared. As the late afternoon began to yield to dusk, painting the ancient courtyard in long, eerie shadows, Antonio felt an unfamiliar prickle of unease himself. The rational explanations, the methodical logic he so rigorously applied, seemed to evaporate in the face of such an absolute void of evidence. How could 11 young men, seemingly without coercion or external force, simply cease to exist from within sealed rooms? Was there a secret passage, an undiscovered egress he hadn't yet found, a shared delusion gripping the entire seminary? Or was he, for the first time in his long career, facing something far more sinister, something that truly defied all logic and all reason? The immense weight of the mystery pressed down on him, a tangible burden. He knew, with an unsettling certainty, that the answers lay hidden somewhere within these ancient walls, shrouded in the oppressive silence and the pervasive fear. His self-imposed task was to unearth them, to bring light into the encroaching darkness that had so utterly enveloped the seminary of San Juan de Latran. He could not, would not, allow the inexplicable to remain so. Please consider subscribing to this channel for more intriguing stories. This is a work of fiction. The following day dawned with a leaden sky, mirroring the somber atmosphere within the seminary. Father Antonio spent hours meticulously re-examining each of the 11 rooms, his analytical mind searching for the smallest deviation, the most minute anomaly that might have been overlooked in the initial panicked inspections. Each cell was a mirror image of the last in its stark, unyielding simplicity, and each door presented the same baffling enigma, locked from the inside, with no apparent means of exit. He questioned the remaining seminarians once more, their faces pale and drawn, their voices barely rising above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might invite the same fate as their missing brethren. They recounted a growing sense of dread in the weeks preceding the disappearances, vague stories of unsettling nightmares, and a pervasive feeling of being constantly watched. But none could offer any concrete, verifiable explanation for the inexplicable events. His search for information led him to the seminary's aging librarian, Brother Elias. Elias was a frail, wizened man, his stooped shoulders and trembling hands belying eyes that held the accumulated knowledge of a lifetime spent amidst books. Elias, after much prodding, recalled no similar incidents in the seminary's extensive, centuries-long history. There were no legends of secret passages in the conventional sense, no whispered tales of malevolent spirits haunting the hallowed halls. However, Elias did mention, almost as an afterthought, an old, forgotten section of the library. It contained texts that had been deemed heretical or simply irrelevant over time, relegated to dusty shelves and rarely disturbed. Antonio made a mental note to explore this neglected repository of knowledge. Sometimes the truth lay buried not in plain sight, but in the forgotten corners. The local villagers, upon learning of the ongoing crisis, spoke in hushed, fearful tones of ancient curses and malevolent evils stirring in the land. Superstition, Antonio knew, ran deep in this rural heart of Portugal, and the inexplicable disappearances were quickly attributed to forces far beyond human comprehension. Antonio, while acknowledging the profound power of belief and its grip on the human psyche, remained steadfast in his systematic, pragmatic search for a logical explanation. He refused to surrender to the notion of the supernatural until every rational avenue had been exhausted. He found himself instinctively drawn to the rhythmic, almost ritualistic routine of the seminary. He observed the precise timing of the daily prayers, the silent, austere meals in the refectory, the hushed movements of the remaining students and clergy as they went about their duties. He looked for patterns, for inconsistencies, for anything that might shed a glimmer of light on the baffling mystery. He noted the close-knit nature of the novice group, They had shared studies, shared devotions, shared their nascent hopes for a life of service. This camaraderie led him to wonder if some shared secret, some collective undertaking, lay at the very heart of their synchronized vanishing. One detail, seemingly innocuous at first, began to prick at his investigative mind. In 3 of the 11 empty rooms, a single small white feather had been found resting on the dusty floor near the threshold of the inexplicably locked door. Father Miguel had quickly dismissed them, suggesting they had merely drifted in from outside through a crack or an open window. But Antonio found their presence unsettling. There were no birds nesting inside the seminary itself, and while the windows were indeed grimy, they were largely sealed against the elements. The feathers seemed too pristine, too deliberately placed to be mere coincidence. As the long day wore on, Antonio felt a growing sense of frustration, a gnawing irritation at the elusive nature of the truth. Every avenue of inquiry seemed to lead to a frustrating dead end. The absolute lack of any physical evidence, no struggle, no forced entry, no discernible trace of a human presence beyond the undisturbed belongings, was deeply perplexing. It was as if the 11 young men had not merely walked away, but had dissolved into thin air, leaving behind only the cold, unyielding stone of their cells. That evening, after the last echoes of Compline had faded into the silence of the night, Antonio made his way to the forgotten section of the library. Dust motes, disturbed by his lantern's beam, danced like tiny, ephemeral spirits in the faint moonlight that filtered through the high, narrow windows. Rows upon rows of forgotten tomes lined the shelves, their leather bindings cracked, faded, and emitting the faint, sweet scent of decay. He ran his fingers along the spines, searching for anything: a cryptic annotation, a long-lost record, a forgotten map that might relate to the seminary's ancient history or to unexplained disappearances from similar institutions. The air was heavy, pregnant with the smell of decaying paper and secrets long buried. He knew, with a growing, unsettling certainty, that the answers he sought might lie hidden, silent, within these neglected pages, waiting for someone to finally read them. The forgotten section of the library, shrouded in a perpetual twilight, proved to be far more than just a repository of obscure texts. It was a silent archive of the seminary's deepest secrets. Father Antonio spent hours poring over ancient chronicles, theological debates that had long since been settled or forgotten, and local histories that spoke more of folklore than fact. He found no direct mention of disappearances within the seminary's documented past, no record of previous mass vanishings, which only deepened the present enigma. However, his tireless research uncovered intriguing details about the very foundation of the building. The seminary, he learned, had been built upon the precise site of a much older structure, rumored by local tradition to have once been a pagan temple, a place of worship dedicated to ancient earthbound deities before its conversion to a Christian sanctuary. Local folklore, often dismissed as mere superstition, spoke of strange, forgotten rituals performed on this land, of chthonic spirits and entities associated with the very earth itself. Antonio, ever the unwavering skeptic, mentally catalogued these tales as fanciful, products of an uneducated peasantry's imagination, but he noted them nonetheless. Even folklore could sometimes contain a kernel of truth, however distorted. He also discovered a collection of meticulously kept journals penned by past rectors of the seminary. These offered intimate, unfiltered glimpses into the daily life of the institution over the centuries, detailing periods of prosperity, severe hardship, and even occasional discreetly handled internal conflicts among the clergy. One particular journal, dating back to the late 17th century, caught his attention. It mentioned, with a vague sense of unease, a period of intense religious fervor and unusual practices among a small, isolated group of novices. The details were frustratingly vague, hinting at something unorthodox, but ultimately inconclusive, a tantalizing thread that led nowhere. While sifting through a forgotten box filled with loose yellowed papers and dried ink, Antonio stumbled upon a faded, crumbling architectural plan of the seminary. It depicted the current structure in remarkable detail, but also hinted at earlier phases of construction, revealing the astonishing existence of a vast, complex network of underground passages and hidden chambers that had long since been sealed off and effectively erased from modern memory. The plan itself was incomplete, lacking precise details and measurements, but its mere existence ignited a powerful new line of inquiry in Antonio's mind. Could these forgotten tunnels, these hidden arteries beneath the very foundations of the seminary, offer a tangible, rational explanation for the inexplicable disappearances? He sought out Brother Elias again, the old librarian, interrupting his quiet, solitary routine. He laid the ancient, brittle plan before him. Elias's eyes widened in genuine surprise, a flash of recognition flickering in their depths. He vaguely recalled seeing such a document many, many years ago, a distant memory from his youth, but had believed it to be long lost, consigned to the dustbin of history. Crucially, he knew nothing concrete of the underground passages themselves, only vaguely remembering tales of their existence. He confirmed that they had likely been sealed off and intentionally forgotten centuries ago, perhaps due to instability or a deliberate desire to erase a part of the seminary's past. Antonio's decision was made. He would explore the seminary's forgotten cellars, the vast, subterranean root system of the building, hoping to find some physical trace, some entrance to these hidden tunnels. The cellars were truly vast and labyrinthine, a bewildering maze filled with towering barrels of aging wine, forgotten stores of provisions, and the silent detritus of centuries. The air was damp, cold, and heavy, and the profound darkness seemed to press in from all sides, a tangible presence. Armed with a single sputtering lantern, its feeble light casting grotesque dancing shadows, Antonio meticulously examined the rough-hewn stone walls, searching for any subtle indication of a blocked doorway, a cleverly disguised archway, or a hidden passage. He noticed several sections of the wall that appeared to be constructed differently from the surrounding masonry, with stones that didn't quite match the older, more uniform blocks. Tapping on these sections with a small hammer he had brought, he detected a distinct hollow sound in one particular area behind a massive, centuries-old wine rack. With the combined strength of some of the remaining surprisingly eager seminarians, whom he had enlisted to help, Antonio managed to move a large, impossibly heavy cabinet that had been placed squarely against this wall. Behind it, almost perfectly concealed, they found it. A narrow, arched doorway, crudely but effectively sealed with loose stones and crumbling mortar, blending almost seamlessly with the surrounding wall. A profound sense of anticipation, laced with an undeniable undercurrent of unease, washed over Antonio. Had he finally found a potential rational explanation for the disappearances? Was this the route the novices had taken, leaving their impossibly locked rooms? Only time and the perilous, uncertain exploration of whatever lay beyond this hidden doorway would provide the answers. The darkness beyond the newly revealed archway seemed to hold both the tantalizing promise of truth and the chilling threat of unknown, possibly terrifying, dangers. The seminary, he realized, had more layers than its stone facade suggested. The air that greeted them from beyond the newly revealed doorway was thick and heavy, laden with the scent of damp earth, stale air, and something else, a faint, almost metallic tang that Antonio couldn't quite place. The opening led to a narrow, winding staircase, its rough-hewn steps descending steeply into an oppressive, inky blackness. Father Antonio, lantern held aloft, cautiously began his descent, followed closely by Father Miguel, whose breath hitched nervously, and two of the braver, though visibly apprehensive, seminarians, each clutching their own flickering lanterns. The light struggled against the profound darkness, casting long, grotesque shadows that writhed and danced on the damp stone walls, exaggerating every imperfection into a monstrous form. The staircase opened abruptly into a series of low-ceilinged tunnels, their rough stone walls cold and slick with centuries of condensation. The air here was even heavier, pressing down on them, and the silence was profound, broken only by the drip of unseen water and the scuff of their boots on the uneven floor. The tunnels branched off in multiple directions, creating a disorienting, subterranean labyrinth. It was immediately clear that these passages had indeed been sealed off for centuries, undisturbed and forgotten by the outside world. The layers of dust and cobwebs were testament to their long abandonment. As they ventured deeper into this forgotten network of tunnels, Antonio's sharp eyes caught sight of faint markings etched into the stone walls. They were not the familiar Christian symbols of the seminary. No crosses, no fish, no IHS monograms. Instead, they appeared to be older, perhaps pagan in origin, echoing the local folklore he had initially dismissed as mere superstition. A persistent, unsettling prickle of unease began to insinuate itself into his otherwise rigorously rational mind. The presence of these ancient symbols, far from the light of Christian worship, suggested a history deeper and perhaps darker than he had imagined. In one of the larger underground chambers they stumbled upon, they found clear remnants of what appeared to be past habitation. Crude stone benches lining the walls, the faint, circular outline of a long dead fire pit in the center, and scattered fragments of rough pottery, indistinguishable in their original form. It seemed that these tunnels had, at some point in the distant past, served as a shelter, a hiding place, or even a living space. But for whom? And during what forgotten era? The implications of such long-term habitation were unsettling. Further exploration revealed several smaller cell-like chambers branching off from the main tunnels, each barely large enough for a single person. In one of these, Antonio's heart sank with a chilling certainty. On the damp earthen floor lay a simple wooden cross, identical in design and wear to those worn by the novices as part of their daily habit. A cold dread, a feeling he rarely allowed himself to acknowledge, washed over him. This was not a random item. It was a direct, undeniable link to the missing boys. They continued their search, their lanterns casting flickering, unreliable shadows that played tricks on their eyes, making every alcove seem to hide a lurking presence. In another small, damp chamber they found more personal belongings, a waterlogged book of prayers, its pages swollen and distorted, a small, crudely carved wooden saint, its features smoothed by years of handling, items that unequivocally belonged to the missing novices. The accumulation of these personal effects, deep within this hidden, forgotten network, confirmed Antonio's rapidly growing fear. The young men had indeed been down here. But why? And more pressingly, where were they now? The objects were relics of presence, not signs of absence. As they pressed on, the tunnels grew narrower and more claustrophobic, the air becoming thick, stale, and difficult to breathe. The oppressive atmosphere seemed to press in on their chests. Suddenly, one of the seminarians cried out, stumbling backward in fright, his lantern nearly slipping from his trembling hand. On the ground before him, almost luminous in the faint light, lay another white feather, identical in every detail to those found in the locked rooms upstairs. The inexplicable appearance of the feather in this hidden underground network was profoundly unsettling. How could it have gotten here? Had the novices brought them, perhaps as some strange memento or a morbid curiosity? Or was there another, far more sinister explanation, one that hinted at a deeper, more insidious presence at play? A pervasive sense of urgency, tinged with a growing sense of dread, now gripped Antonio. The discovery of the novices' belongings confirmed that they had been in these tunnels, that their baffling disappearance from locked rooms had a physical, if secret, explanation. But their continued absence from the tunnels suggested that they had either found another, even more secret way out, or that something far more terrible had befallen them down here. The mystery had not been solved. It had merely deepened, leading them further into the dark, hidden underbelly of the seminary, where the very stones themselves seemed to whisper secrets of a long-forgotten past, secrets that now threatened to consume the present. If you are enjoying this mystery, please consider subscribing to the channel for the next chapter. This is a work of fiction. The unsettling discovery of the pristine white feather deep within the musty underground tunnels was the catalyst that hardened Father Antonio's resolve. The rational, step-by-step approach he prided himself on was now infused with a desperate urgency. He knew with a chilling certainty that he had to uncover the truth, whatever its nature. He immediately ordered a thorough, systematic search of the entire subterranean network, emphasizing the need to pay excruciating attention to any sign of recent passage, any disturbance of the ancient dust, or any further undiscovered exits. The tunnels proved to be far more extensive and labyrinthine than the faded architectural plan had suggested. They branched out in a bewildering array of directions, creating a sprawling, subterranean maze. It took the better part of the day, with lanterns flickering like restless spirits in the oppressive darkness, to map even a significant portion of them. They found more remnants of past habitation, crude tools, discarded clay pots, even a few ancient petrified bones that seemed to belong to small animals. But, frustratingly, no further belongings of the missing novices beyond those first few disturbing items. The air remained heavy with a pervasive sense of abandonment and profound decay, a stillness that suggested nothing living had traversed these paths in centuries. One particular tunnel, narrower and even more claustrophobic than the others, led them to what appeared to be a definitive dead end, a solid, unyielding rock face with no visible cracks or openings. Antonio, however, had learned to trust his instincts in this unsettling labyrinth. Upon closer inspection, he noticed a faint, almost imperceptible draft of air emanating from a small, jagged crevice near the floor, too small for a human to pass through, but undeniably present. Using a sturdy, pointed tool he had borrowed from the seminary's meager workshop, a relic of a mason's craft, he carefully, painstakingly widened the crevice. It was a slow, arduous process, the stone resisting his efforts, but eventually the crevice grudgingly revealed a narrow, vertical passage beyond. Squeezing through the tight, unforgiving opening, scraping against the rough rock, Antonio found himself in another, smaller and remarkably different chamber. The air here was less stagnant, surprisingly, and there was a distinct, earthy smell, fresher than the mustiness of the main tunnels. In the very center of the chamber, his lantern light caught on something reflective. It was a shallow well, its murky water still and silent, reflecting the flickering flame like an unblinking eye. As he approached the well, his gaze was drawn downward. Something was glinting faintly at the bottom, partially obscured by the murk. With the combined effort of one of the seminarians who had managed to squeeze through the opening after him, they managed to lower a crude bucket, fashioned from a retrieved piece of timber, and carefully retrieve the object. It was a small, tarnished silver locket, intricately engraved with a familiar set of initials. T.M. Thomas Manuel, one of the missing novices, the very same boy whose journal he had found earlier. The discovery of the locket in the well was a significant, if chilling, breakthrough. It undeniably placed Brother Tomas, and by extension the other novices who were almost certainly with him, in this hidden chamber, in this secluded part of the underground network. But the presence of the well also raised a host of new, deeply disturbing questions. Had they used it for water, a simple source of sustenance during their hidden activities? Or was its significance far more sinister, tied to some darker purpose or ritual that the well itself was merely a part of? Antonio meticulously examined the well's immediate surroundings. The ground around it was damp, and he noticed faint, distinctive footprints pressed into the soft, muddy earth. They appeared to be the size and shape of those worn by the novices in their simple leather sandals. Following these faint, almost indistinguishable tracks, he noticed they led towards another narrow passage at the far end of the chamber, a passage that seemed to ascend, almost imperceptibly, towards the unseen surface. A renewed sense of hope, mixed with a lingering visceral unease, filled Antonio. Could this be it? Could this be the way out of the underground labyrinth? Or would it lead only to further mysteries, deeper dangers, and perhaps an even more horrifying truth? He decided, without hesitation, to follow the passage, his determination absolute. The secrets hidden beneath the Seminary of Saint João de la Trone were slowly, agonizingly beginning to reveal themselves, layer by layer. But the full truth, the precise fate of the 11 young men, still remained shrouded in the suffocating darkness of the earth, waiting to be brought to light. The ascending passage was a relentless, arduous climb, steep and winding, leading them upwards for what felt like an eternity in the oppressive underground darkness. Each step was a struggle, the rough stone grating beneath their boots, and the air grew subtly but noticeably fresher with every meter gained, hinting at the proximity of the surface. Faint, muffled sounds began to filter down from above, indistinct whispers, the distant clang of a bell, sounds that confirmed their slow but steady ascent towards the world above. Eventually, the passage, narrower than any they had yet encountered, opened abruptly into a small, dust-choked alcove. Before them stood a massive, ornate wooden panel, perfectly integrated into what appeared to be a rarely used section of the seminary's upper floor. The room beyond the panel was shrouded in dust, silent and still, filled with forgotten furniture draped in ghostly white sheets, a collection of spectral forms. Antonio recognized it as a disused storage room, located disconcertingly close to the seminary's old chapel, a place where few clergy or seminarians regularly ventured. The wooden panel, he observed, was a masterpiece of concealment. Cleverly disguised as a seamless part of the wall, it could be opened only from the inside via a cunningly hidden latch. A sense of cold dread settled over him. They had found a way out of the underground tunnels, a secret egress that allowed passage directly into the heart of the seminary. The novices had indeed used this clandestine route to move between their impossibly locked cells and the subterranean network. But the crucial, agonizing question remained, echoing in the suffocating silence. Why? What clandestine activities had necessitated such a secret passage? And most terrifyingly, where were they now? Antonio immediately ordered a thorough, systematic search of the storage room and the surrounding, rarely used areas. They found nothing of immediate significance, no further clues to the novices' whereabouts, no sign of struggle or hurried departure. It was as if the young men had emerged from the hidden passage, stepped into the dust-filled room, and then, impossibly, vanished once again into thin air, leaving behind only the lingering mystery of their movements. The discovery of the secret passage, while finally explaining how the novices could have left their locked rooms, paradoxically deepened the overall mystery. It answered one question only to spawn a dozen more. Why would they need to use such a clandestine, elaborate route? What were they doing in the vast, ancient underground tunnels that required such secrecy? And why had they disappeared completely, leaving no trace, after reaching the seminary's upper floor? The initial chilling puzzle had merely fractured into a series of even more unsettling questions. Overwhelmed by the fresh wave of uncertainty, Antonio decided to retrace their steps, to return to the heart of the enigma. He went back to the underground chambers, meticulously retracing their arduous path, his lantern beam searching every shadow, every crack in the ancient stone. He paid particular attention to the chamber with the well, the very spot where the silver locket had been found. Kneeling beside the murky water, his eyes scanning the dim reflections, he noticed something else, almost entirely hidden beneath the surface, obscured by the murky depths. Using a longer rope and a makeshift hook fashioned from a piece of twisted metal, they carefully managed to retrieve the object. It was a small, leather-bound journal, its pages swollen and discolored by prolonged immersion in the water. The journal was heavily waterlogged, its delicate pages stuck together in a sodden block, the ink bleeding in places. But with painstaking care and a surge of renewed hope, Antonio managed to separate them, one by agonizing one. The handwriting, though faint and often smeared, was undeniably that of Brother Tomás, the young novice to whom the locket belonged. The entries themselves were fragmented and often cryptic, scrawled in a hurried, almost frantic style, as if written under duress or in the grip of profound fear. The early entries spoke, in a tone of youthful excitement, of a shared fascination among the novices with the seminary's forgotten history and the rich, unsettling local folklore that permeated the region. They had, Tomás wrote, discovered the existence of the underground tunnels through fragmented references in old, dusty documents found in the forgotten library section. They had begun exploring them in secret, initially out of pure curiosity, a sense of adventure, and the thrill of clandestine discovery. However, the tone of the later entries grew progressively darker, more ominous. Tomás wrote of strange, unsettling sounds echoing through the deeper tunnels. Sounds that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. He meticulously documented a growing paranoia among the group, a pervasive sense of being watched, of not being alone in the subterranean darkness. He mentioned a shared discovery in the deeper chambers, something that had profoundly frightened them, but which he did not explicitly describe, as if the words themselves were too terrible to commit to paper. The final entries were the most disturbing, the ink almost smeared into illegibility, as if the pen had trembled violently in Tomás's hand. He wrote of feeling trapped, of an insurmountable obstacle, of an unseen presence preventing their escape. He scribbled frantically of being watched, constantly, relentlessly. The very last legible entry ended abruptly, a terrifying, unfinished thought, with the chilling words, "We can't escape. They won't let us." The journal painted a terrifying picture of a group of young men whose innocent curiosity had led them to stumble upon something truly sinister, a dark and dangerous secret hidden in the subterranean depths beneath the seminary. This chilling discovery, whatever it was, had ultimately led to their baffling disappearance. But what had they found? And who, or what, was preventing their escape, holding them captive in the darkness? The mystery, far from being solved, had taken an even darker, more disturbing turn, transforming from a simple disappearance into a chilling tale of entrapment and unseen forces. The fragmented, terrifying entries in Brother Tomás's journal sent a visceral wave of unease, bordering on dread, through the core of Father Antonio's being. The young novice's frantic words hinted at a profound and dark secret, buried not just beneath the seminary's foundations, but also deep within its forgotten history. It was clear that the young men had stumbled upon something truly malevolent, something that had instilled a terror so profound it transcended mere words. Antonio knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he had to return to the tunnels, to delve even deeper into the mystery and confront the very nature of their terrifying discovery. This time, his venture into the subterranean network was marked by an almost agonizing sense of caution. He was no longer merely seeking answers, he was hunting for a hidden menace. He brought only Father Miguel, whose fear was palpable but whose loyalty was unwavering, and two of the most trusted and level-headed seminarians, their faces grim but resolute. They made their way back to the chamber with the well, the very spot where the waterlogged journal had been retrieved. Antonio meticulously examined the surrounding area once more, his lantern beam sweeping every inch of the damp stone, searching for any further clues that might have been missed in their haste. Near a section of collapsed tunnel, almost perfectly concealed beneath a pile of loose ancient rubble, his keen eye caught sight of something unusual. It was a small, crudely fashioned wooden box, its surface encrusted with centuries of dirt and grime. It was locked, but with some effort and a well-placed lever, they managed to pry it open, the old wood groaning in protest. Inside, nestled amongst layers of dust and desiccated leaves, they found a collection of old, yellowed documents, their brittle pages filled with faded ink, written in a mixture of Latin and archaic Portuguese. The documents, upon initial inspection, appeared to be related to the seminary's early history, routine records of land ownership, ancient contracts, and mundane correspondence with the local diocese. But as Antonio carefully sorted through them, his fingers brushing against the fragile paper, he uncovered a far more disturbing text. It was a series of detailed, unsettling accounts describing strange occurrences and unexplained deaths in the immediate area, all predating the seminary's construction and all explicitly linked to the very site of the old pagan temple upon which the sacred building now stood. These accounts, chillingly precise in their descriptions, spoke of local legends that had been suppressed for centuries, of bizarre rituals performed in the earth, and of a malevolent, chthonic entity said to dwell deep beneath the hill itself. Antonio, despite his ingrained skepticism towards anything overtly supernatural, found the parallels with the fragmented entries in the Novices' journal profoundly unsettling. Tomas's vague allusions to something terrifying, something that wouldn't let them escape, now took on a terrifying concrete form. Another document within the box, a partially translated excerpt from an impossibly ancient text, offered an even more disturbing revelation. It described a subterranean cult that had once worshipped a forgotten chthonic deity on this very land. The excerpt ominously mentioned rituals involving offerings of the living and disappearances within the hallowed earth chambers. The language was archaic, veiled in symbolic terms, but the implications were horrifyingly clear. A chilling, horrifying realization began to dawn on Antonio, tightening like an icy band around his chest. Could it be that the 11 novices, in their innocent, ill-fated exploration, had not merely stumbled upon old records, but upon evidence of this forgotten cult's continued existence? Perhaps even a hidden, active shrine, or the horrifying remnants of their ancient, bloodthirsty rituals within the very tunnels the boys had so eagerly explored. Had their innocent curiosity somehow awakened a dormant evil, a malevolent force slumbering beneath the seminary for centuries? Or perhaps even more terrifyingly, had their presence angered individuals who still secretly practiced these ancient forbidden rites, individuals hidden in plain sight, maintaining the cult's dark legacy? The scattered pieces of the complex, horrifying puzzle were slowly but inexorably beginning to come together, painting a grim and increasingly plausible picture of the novices' true fate. Their initial, seemingly harmless curiosity had led them to uncover a dark and inherently dangerous secret, one that had ultimately resulted not just in their disappearance, but possibly in their unwitting involvement in something unspeakable. But the agonizing question remained, hanging heavy in the damp, stale air of the tunnels. Where were they now? Had they become unwilling victims of some unspeakable ancient ritual, sacrificed to a forgotten god? Or was there a more human, yet equally sinister and equally terrifying explanation for their fate? Antonio felt a growing sense of urgent dread, a cold knot in his stomach. The truth, he feared, was far more disturbing and horrifying than he had initially dared to imagine. He knew with absolute certainty that he had to continue his relentless investigation, to follow the crumbling trail of clues deeper into the oppressive darkness, even if it meant confronting something truly, irrevocably terrifying. The secrets of the seminary were giving themselves up, one horrifying piece at a time. If you are gripped by this unfolding mystery, please subscribe to the channel for the next chapter and the continuation of Father Antonio's investigation. This is a work of fiction. Driven by the profoundly unsettling revelations contained within the wooden box and the ancient documents, Father Antonio focused his investigation with a renewed, grim determination. His search now narrowed to the deeper, more secluded sections of the underground tunnels, guided by the cryptic hints embedded in the archaic texts. He paid meticulous attention to any architectural anomaly, any chamber or alcove that might remotely resemble a place of ancient worship or a site for forbidden rituals, no matter how subtly disguised. The air grew colder, the silence heavier as they ventured further into the earth's embrace. After several agonizing hours of arduous searching, their lanterns cutting through the suffocating gloom, they discovered a previously unnoticed passage. It branched off from the main tunnel system near the partially collapsed section, a narrow, almost invisible fissure in the ancient rock. This passage was choked with centuries of accumulated debris, loose stones, and solidified mud, making it appear impassable. But Antonio, now acutely attuned to the subtle signs of hidden spaces, perceived a faint, almost imperceptible current of air. He was determined. After painstakingly clearing away some of the fallen stones and ancient detritus with his bare hands, they managed with considerable effort to squeeze through the tight opening, emerging into a new, unexplored cavern. The passage opened into a large, cavernous chamber, its ceiling lost in the shadows far above, its dimensions vast and imposing. The air here was thick with a pervasive, musty odor, deeper and more oppressive than anywhere else, a smell of ancient decay and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet that made Antonio's stomach clench. The silence within this chamber was profound, heavy and almost suffocating, as if the very air absorbed all sound. In the desolate center of the chamber, illuminated grotesquely by their flickering lanterns, they found it. A crudely constructed stone altar, its rough surface stained with a dark, reddish substance that Antonio's mind instantly recoiled from identifying, though its appearance strongly suggested dried blood. Around the altar, scattered haphazardly on the uneven floor, they found even more disturbing evidence. Remnants of what appeared to be burnt offerings, charred bones, and unidentifiable organic matter. Strange, arcane symbols meticulously etched into the cold stone floor, some smeared with the same reddish stain. And several small, bone-like fragments, too small to identify, but unmistakably organic. A palpable, icy sense of dread filled the chamber, clinging to the very air. This was undeniably a place of dark rituals, a sanctuary of malevolence that had been hidden and forgotten by the world above for untold centuries, now revealed in all its chilling reality. As Antonio, his heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs, carefully examined the symbols etched into the stone floor, a cold recognition washed over him. He recognized some of them from the partially translated ancient text he had discovered in the wooden box. They were indeed symbols associated with the chthonic deity mentioned in the chilling document, a forgotten god whose worship had demanded terrible sacrifices. This was no mere superstition. It was a tangible, terrifying truth. A chilling, horrifying realization began to dawn on Antonio, settling over him like a shroud of ice. Had the 11 novices, in their ill-fated quest for discovery, stumbled upon this very hidden chamber and its unspeakable dark secrets? Had their innocent, youthful presence somehow disturbed something that was meant to remain dormant, a slumbering evil waiting to be reawakened? The evidence, horrifying as it was, pointed to an undeniable conclusion. He noticed a narrow opening in the far wall of the cavernous chamber, partially concealed by deep, oppressive shadows. With a profound sense of trepidation, his hand instinctively gripping the hilt of his crucifix, he approached it, his lantern casting eerie, dancing shadows that distorted the ancient rock into monstrous shapes. The opening led to another, smaller and even darker passage. And from within, faint but distinct, he could hear a low, rhythmic sound, a monotonous, almost imperceptible chanting, a sound that seemed to hum in the very air around them, carrying an ancient, unsettling melody. Antonio instinctively signaled to Father Miguel and the two seminarians to remain absolutely silent, their faces pale and drawn with dawning horror. He cautiously moved forward, his heart pounding in his ears, peering into the inky blackness beyond the narrow opening. The passage opened directly into another, slightly smaller chamber, this one illuminated by the weak, flickering glow of numerous candles, casting long, grotesque shadows. And there, in the dim, dancing light, Antonio saw them. 11 figures, undeniably clad in their distinctive novice robes, stood in a circle around another, crudely made altar, similar to the one he had just discovered. Their faces were pale and gaunt, their eyes vacant and unseeing, staring blankly ahead. They were chanting in a low, monotonous drone, a repetitive hum that seemed to emanate from deep within their chests, their voices utterly devoid of emotion or inflection, like automata. In the very center of the ritualistic circle stood a 12th figure, cloaked in deep shadow, his face entirely obscured by a dark, cowled hood. He was conducting the sinister chant, his hands moving in strange, ritualistic gestures, his form unnaturally still and commanding. Antonio's blood ran cold, turning to ice in his veins. The scene before him was beyond anything he could have conceived, both terrifyingly real and horrifyingly surreal. He had found the missing novices, but they were no longer the vibrant, curious young men who had entered the seminary. They appeared to be under some powerful, malevolent trance, unwilling participants in a dark ritual that seemed both impossibly ancient and deeply, irrevocably sinister. The mystery of their disappearance had, at long last, been solved. But the truth was far more horrifying, far more disturbing than he could have ever, in his wildest nightmares, imagined. He had stumbled upon a hidden cult, a group that had been secretly operating beneath the very foundation of the sacred seminary for untold years, and the 11 vanished novices were now unwilling, enslaved participants in their dark, unholy rites. The real horror, Antonio realized with a sickening jolt, was only just beginning. The sight of the entranced novices, their vacant eyes and monotonous chanting a grotesque parody of their former selves, and the chilling presence of the cloaked figure conducting the ritual, sent a shockwave of profound fear and visceral revulsion through Father Antonio. His mind raced, struggling to process the horrifying reality before him. He knew with an agonizing clarity that he had to act, and swiftly, but he was also acutely aware of the perilousness of their situation. They were hopelessly outnumbered in this hidden, suffocating chamber, facing an unknown danger that transcended the physical. Confronting them head-on was not an option. He silently, carefully retreated back to where Father Miguel and the two seminarians waited, their faces etched with a mixture of growing horror and desperate worry, their breath held tight in their chests. Antonio quickly, in hushed but urgent tones, explained what he had witnessed, the words feeling inadequate to convey the full terror of the scene. A silent agreement passed between them. They had to find a way to stop the ritual, to break the malevolent hold over the novices, and to rescue them from whatever unspeakable fate awaited them. But they were woefully ill-equipped to confront a potentially dangerous, fanatical cult. Antonio, his strategic mind working furiously even amidst the fear, decided their best course of action was to attempt to create a diversion. Something loud, something jarring, anything that might shatter the novice's trance and disrupt the ritual's hypnotic rhythm. He instructed Father Miguel, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands, to return immediately to the seminary above and gather as many of the remaining clergy and any able-bodied individuals as he could find. Speed was of the essence. While Miguel raced for help, Antonio and the two remaining seminarians would attempt to create a significant disturbance from within the tunnels, a calculated risk to buy time. returning to the large, cavernous chamber with the crude altar, the antechamber to the ritual site. Antonio and the seminarians located a large pile of loose stones near a partially collapsed section of the tunnel wall. With desperate urgency and quiet coordination, they began to dislodge them, leveraging larger rocks against smaller ones, sending a deliberate, controlled cascade of stones crashing down. The sudden, deafening noise echoed with deafening force through the silent underground network, a thunderclap in the profound stillness. The impact of the falling rocks served its purpose. It momentarily shattered the hypnotic, rhythmic drone of the cult's chant. The entranced novices stirred, their vacant eyes flickering with confusion, their bodies twitching as if waking from a deep, disturbing sleep. The cloaked figure, the architect of this dark ceremony, stopped his chanting abruptly, his hooded head snapping towards the source of the deafening noise, a palpable aura of irritation and disturbance emanating from him. Taking full advantage of the critical disruption, Antonio and the two brave seminarians surged forward, rushing into the ritual chamber itself. "Brothers, wake up! You are being deceived! This is a perversion!" Antonio cried out, his voice raw with urgency, echoing through the cavern, challenging the sinister peace that had reigned moments before. The cloaked figure spun around, turning towards them with unnerving speed. And for the first time, in the flickering, unsteady candlelight, Antonio caught a horrifying glimpse of his face. It was the seminary's aging librarian, Brother Elias. His eyes, usually kind and gentle, softened by years of quiet study, now gleamed with a chilling, zealous fanaticism, a terrifying intensity that transformed his familiar features into something utterly alien. "You interfere with forces you do not understand, Father Antonio," Elias hissed, his voice no longer frail but imbued with a chilling, resonant power that seemed to emanate from the very earth itself. "The Ancient Ones demand what is theirs. Their time has come." As Elias spoke, his voice rising in a desperate attempt to reassert control, some of the novices began to stir more fully. Their eyes slowly, agonizingly began to focus, flickering with a dawning horror as they seemed to recognize their surroundings, their predicament, and the terrifying figure before them. Others, however, remained caught in their trance, their chanting faltering but not completely ceasing, their minds still tethered to the cult's insidious influence. A frantic, desperate struggle ensued. Antonio and the two seminarians, their hearts pounding, tried to physically pull the novices away from the blasphemous circle, urging them to break free from the hypnotic thrall. Brother Elias, with surprising strength and agility for his age, fought back, his voice rising in a desperate guttural attempt to resume the ritual, to bind his unwilling disciples to their dark fate. The chamber was filled with the discordant cacophony of desperate shouts, the dying remnants of the unholy chant, and the frantic scuffling of feet on the cold, damp stone floor. Just as the chaotic situation seemed on the verge of spiraling completely out of control, threatening to overwhelm Antonio and his two companions, a new sound echoed through the tunnels. The rush of many feet, the hurried whispers of alarmed voices. Father Miguel arrived, leading a small but determined group of clergy and additional seminarians, alerted by the continuous noise and guided by Antonio's earlier instructions. Their arrival, a beacon of light and sanity in the oppressive darkness, immediately turned the tide. Outnumbered and outmaneuvered, Brother Elias was quickly, forcefully subdued, his desperate struggles ceasing as he was restrained. The remaining entranced novices, freed from his immediate influence, were gently but firmly led away from the desecrated chamber, their faces a mixture of confusion, terror, and profound relief. The dark, insidious secret buried deep beneath the seminary of Saint Juan de Latran had at long last been dragged into the light. The 11 vanished novices had been found, alive, though not in the way anyone could have possibly imagined. The ordeal, however, was far from truly over. The psychological scars inflicted upon the young men by their abduction and the cult's horrifying indoctrination would undoubtedly run deep, perhaps irrevocably so. and the shocking revelation that one of their own, a respected, seemingly innocuous figure within the sacred seminary, was the clandestine leader of a hidden ancient cult, would cast a long, chilling shadow over the institution for generations to come. The sanctity of the seminary had been irrevocably stained. In the harrowing aftermath of the discovery, the venerable seminary of Saint João de Latran found itself plunged into an unprecedented state of turmoil, its ancient quiet shattered by the chilling revelations from its own depths. The 11 novices, though physically unharmed, were profoundly and irrevocably traumatized by their terrifying ordeal. Their vacant stares and the memory of their monotonous chanting haunted the waking hours of all who had witnessed their plight. They were immediately placed under the compassionate and gentle care of the more empathetic members of the clergy, who worked tirelessly and with a deep sense of sorrow to help them process the immense psychological impact of their abduction, the insidious cult's indoctrination, and the horrifying realization that their spiritual guide had been their captor. Brother Elias, the seemingly gentle and unassuming librarian, now exposed as the fanatical leader of the ancient subterranean cult, was swiftly taken into custody by the local authorities. His motives, as he eventually revealed in a series of chilling, dispassionate confessions, were rooted in a deeply twisted and dangerous belief system. He genuinely believed in the resurgence of the old pagan gods, seeing himself as a harbinger of their return, driven by a zealous, messianic desire to restore their long-forgotten worship in the region. He had been secretly, cunningly luring the novices into the network of underground tunnels over a period of months, slowly, insidiously indoctrinating them into his arcane beliefs, meticulously preparing them as unwitting participants for his dark, blasphemous rituals, culminating in what he believed would be a grand reawakening. The seemingly innocuous white feathers, which had perplexed Father Antonio from the outset, were finally explained. Elias had used them as subtle, almost imperceptible symbols to communicate with those novices who were already beginning to succumb to his insidious influence. They served as a silent, secret mark, guiding the chosen young men through the clandestine passages, a macabre breadcrumb trail leading them deeper into the darkness, and ultimately into his control. The local authorities were immediately and fully informed of the horrifying events, and a thorough, meticulous investigation of the vast underground tunnels and the cult's chilling activities was launched. The hidden chambers, once a sacred yet forgotten part of the earth, now tainted by unspeakable acts, were permanently sealed off, their existence to be forever erased from memory, their secrets buried once more beneath tons of rock and soil. The seminary itself, now a silent witness to a dark chapter, underwent a profound period of intense scrutiny, cleansing, and spiritual purification, a desperate attempt to wash away the lingering stains of malevolence. Father Antonio remained at the seminary for several weeks after the resolution, his presence a comforting anchor in the storm. He diligently assisted the shaken bishop in restoring order, offering wise counsel and much-needed spiritual guidance to the deeply traumatized novices and the equally shaken clergy. He spent countless hours in quiet reflection, contemplating the terrifying events that had unfolded beneath his very feet. He pondered the thin, almost imperceptible line between devout faith and dangerous fanaticism, the insidious way in which belief could be twisted into a tool of control and destruction. He reflected, too, on the disturbing truth that true darkness could lurk, unseen and unsuspected, beneath even the most sacred and venerable of places, festering in the shadows. The baffling mystery of the vanished novices had at long last been definitively solved, its terrifying details laid bare. But its resolution left an indelible, haunting impact on everyone involved, a scar on the soul of the seminary and its inhabitants. The institution would forever be marked by the chilling events of 1833, a stark, profound reminder of the insidious dangers of hidden secrets, the corrupting power of unchecked belief, and the enduring, horrifying grip of ancient malevolence, however misguided. As for Father Antonio himself, the harrowing experience solidified his unwavering commitment to reason, critical thinking, and the pursuit of truth, even within the deeply spiritual realm of faith. The profound darkness he had confronted in the hidden tunnels, the raw, unspeakable evil he had witnessed, had tested his beliefs to their very core. But ultimately, rather than shattering his conviction, it had paradoxically strengthened his resolve to seek truth and justice, to confront darkness wherever it might hide, no matter how terrifying the revelation. He eventually left the Seminary of Saint João de Latran, carrying not a triumph, but a heavy heart, burdened by the knowledge of what humanity was capable of, both good and unspeakably evil. The silence of the empty novice rooms would forever echo the haunting mystery he had so painstakingly unraveled, a silent testament to the horrors that lie beneath the surface, waiting to be disturbed. Thank you for watching this story unfold. If you enjoyed this tale of suspense and mystery, please consider subscribing to the channel for more gripping narratives. This was a work of fiction,